Hello world. Right, so, wow, this is very loud. Let me turn that down. Okay, maybe that's better. Okay, so, with that, we're going to be talking about modern React. Before we get into things, this is the URL that you hopefully have already gone to and set up. If you set it up anytime before like 11:30 last night, then just do a git pull. I didn't change any dependencies, so you won't need to reinstall, but do a git pull to get the latest stuff. And if that doesn't work, just like start fresh. It should install pretty quick. So yeah, and we'll talk about what we're gonna do or how this workshop works. How many of you have been to one of my workshops before? Okay, just a couple of you. So this follows the pretty standard way that I do workshops, so I'll teach you all that way as well. Before we get into stuff though, I'd like to invite everybody to please stand up. Raise your hand if you exercised this morning. I'm not raising my hand. So this is our exercise. I want you to put your arms out in front of you like this and squat down and come back up. This is an air squat. We'll do 12 of these together. Count with me. Ready? 1, 2. You're not counting loud enough. 3. I want to disrupt their meeting. 5, 6, 7, 8. You're doing so well. 9, 10. Actually, this is a lot of fun. Let's start over. 12. Okay, just kidding. Okay, stretch over your head as high as you can, and stretch over to one side, and over to the other. Oh, that feels so good. Okay, now before you sit down, turn to the person next to you, introduce yourself, and thank them for coming to the workshop. All right. Awesome. We're all friends here. So, yeah, this is actually not the slides for this workshop. This is slides for another workshop. But it helps me make sure that I cover the things I want to. So, like, I'm covering it up on my screen, but that doesn't work. So, here. Responsive. Dang it. Okay, so this workshop is going to be very interactive and hands-on. It is actually pretty fundamental because we're talking about the basics of hooks. Hooks is also extremely alpha. There was a change yesterday, totally removed a hook, one which I wasn't planning on covering anyway, so that's okay. But yeah, so things are changing. They're in Flex. They're planning on adding hooks maybe. Actually, React timeline. Oh, React. Let's see. Here, let's just see. No. Boo. Here, let's go to React blog timeline. Here it is, roadmap. That's what I was looking for. So just yesterday, Dan Abramoff posted this React 16.x roadmap where he talked about, here we've got Suspense for code splitting. That's already implemented, and we do have exercises for that. So you can actually try out Suspense, which is pretty cool. React Hooks is not expected to be released till Q1 of next year. So like you can go back to your projects and install the alpha if you want to. Just know that you'll probably have to make changes when it's actually stable and released. Concurrent mode, that's Q2 of next year. So we're not going to be talking about concurrent mode or Suspense for data fetching. Dan asked me to stop teaching about these things. So I'm honoring his wishes. I'm not going to teach these things until they're more stable. But at the same time, there is code in the repo that uses React Cache, which is what Suspense for data fetching is for. And so you can look at it and see what it's doing, and it's kind of interesting. Yeah, so here, I'll post this here. Yeah, so one person here, King Daro, was like, what? They removed a hook? The hook they removed is... I think they didn't actually remove it from the docs. So here, let me post the docs to the chat. If you just go to reactjs.org/hooks, then it'll take you to the docs. If you look at the hooks API reference, we're going to be looking at this quite a lot during the course of our workshop here, or you are, because you're going to be doing a lot of work, and so you'll want to reference this stuff. The one they removed is use mutation effect. because at the time your effect callback ran, refs weren't even set up yet. There was pretty much nothing it could do that was useful. So they removed that, and now if you want something to run synchronously after rendering, then use layout effect is what you should use. So yeah, they're making some significant changes. Yeah, all the examples are not 100% practical. We're doing like counters, and we're using this vanilla tilt library that like you wouldn't really actually use in your apps probably. The idea is I don't want to make a complicated example where you need to learn both how the complicated example works and how hooks work. So we're doing really basic stuff so that you can focus on learning hooks and not getting the context around these complicated examples. This also is not covering everything that's available in hooks. So if we go up here, we're going to be doing, let me bump that up a little bit, use state, use effect. We actually don't have an exercise for use context, but it's actually really straightforward. So if we have time, then I'll show you. We're going to be using use reducer. We don't have use callback or memo. We are using use ref, and we will be using use layout effect. So most of the goodies of using effects is just like getting your hands dirty with them. And once you kind of get the right mental model, then using these other effects kind of becomes more natural. And some of these effects are like really discouraged, like use imperative methods, which actually they're going to rename to something else probably. So yeah, some of these things you probably generally don't want to do anyway. So we'll get into those things. And yeah, let's talk about setup really quick. Raise your hand if you have everything set up. Okay, so if you don't, right now is the time to get things set up. So you go to this repo, kentcdodds/modern-react, and follow the setup instructions. And hopefully that is pretty straightforward. I just missed a call from my mom. I'll call her back during your exercises. Yeah, and if you want to, you can actually use the code sandbox, and I'm pretty sure it should work. All in this code sandbox. It is using the node template, which means that you can actually, if you fork it, then you can click on server control panel and actually run the scripts, and it'll like run your app in a container and stuff. It's kind of really awesome. So if you want to, you can do the whole workshop in the browser, if that sounds awesome to you. It sounds awesome to me, but I'm going to do it locally. Okay, let me think. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Sorry, the beginning is always really boring. Let's talk about logistics. Feel free to throw something at me if I'm not seeing you raise your hand, and I will answer your questions. So yeah, raise your hand or throw something at me to ask or answer questions. This is a very interactive thing. We're all friends here. We're not like at a conference where it would be totally inappropriate to interrupt the speaker. Right here it's totally appropriate to interrupt me. Use the workshop chat room. So for us here present, we don't really have a chat room. So yeah, just raise your hand. But for everybody who's watching online, I'm going to try and keep the or reference the chat. So I'll be looking at that. Somebody just asked, is it safe to use React Alpha in production? Safe is a relative term. So it depends on what safe means for you. Are you fine with potential bugs and having to change code when they change implementation? Then yeah, it's pretty safe. Actually, so Facebook runs on master of React. So if it's in master, then Facebook is using it. Facebook's been using hooks for like 2 months already. They're also using Suspense for data fetching. So they've been using this stuff for a while. I don't know if we have a bug and we're like, oh hey Facebook, fix master because we have a bug. They're like, we told you not to use master. But if Facebook has a bug, then they're like, yeah, we'll fix it right now. So yeah, there's priorities and stuff. Probably if you don't want to be in trouble, then I probably wouldn't suggest using Alpha. Okay, so at the end of each of our exercises, there's an elaboration and feedback form. There's a link to this. I will show you really quick what that looks like. If we go to here, right here, at the bottom of our test, and I'll show you how to run the test and everything. So you copy that link, and it will take you to this form, which has the wrong title, rats. So you can update that title if you want to. If you don't, that's fine too. It's my bad. But anyway, yeah. So this feedback form is just as much for you as it is for me, because it has this part where you can elaborate on what you learned, and it's scientifically proven that if you do this, you'll remember things better. So for those of you who want to remember what you're experiencing today, do that. If you don't want to remember what you're experiencing today, then that's cool too, I guess. Yes, Ethan.
I'm having trouble installing stuff. I keep getting this scrolling emoji.
Oh no.
Is anyone else getting that? Because if no one else is getting it, I'll just use the code sandbox.
I can help you out during the exercise. That's sad. Okay. So if you have any questions for me, like if you see me use something and you're like, how did he use, I don't know, how did he get his emoji in there? What is this thing? Like if you see me do things and you're like, what the heck is that? Feel free to go check my AMA and ask me questions on there if you don't want to like interrupt the workshop. And then I tweet a lot, so you can follow me there. Any questions about the logistics of how things, or how we're supposed to interact here together? Okay, so here's our routine for each one of these exercises. I'm going to give you a little bit of a why and an intro to each exercise. Then you can work through the exercise. So I'm not going to actually teach you the concept first. You're going to, I have code, and there's Cody the koala bear. Here, I'll show you what that looks like. Cody the koala bear will be here and tell you what to do, and you're going to go do that. And then when we're all done, if you finish, and pair programming is a really great way to solidify what you're learning. So if you're comfortable pairing with somebody, then I recommend doing that because you'll learn it better. And then you'll fill out the elaboration and feedback form. Some of these have a bonus. I think like only one has a bonus of this one. Help each other and make pull requests if you see something that's weird in the project. Once we're all done, I will go through the solution, and you can ask questions. During the exercise, of course, you can ask questions as well. Throw something at me or whatever. Yeah, and then we'll move on to the next exercise. Sound good? Okay, sweet. So I should mention that some of these exercises, like if it takes you longer to work through the exercise than I give you time for, that's actually fine. The whole design of this workshop is for you to get your hands dirty first, get your mind in the right context, the right frame of mind. You like are trying to solve a problem, and then I can come in and show you the solution, and you'll be able to ask the right questions because you've already struggled with it. It works out pretty well. So let me think. Yeah, let's go ahead and I'll show you how to set up or how to run the tests and things, and then I'm gonna do kind of a holistic what are hooks kind of thing before we actually start doing exercises, because I think that would be helpful. So if you are running locally or if you're running in the Code Sandbox, either way you're going to want to run the test script. So in the Code Sandbox there's like this server control panel. You just click on the test script there. Here you're going to open up your terminal to the location, and then you run npm run test, and this will start your tests in dev mode or in watch mode. So we're using Jest here. How many people are using Jest? It's the best. If you're not using Jest, give it a try. It's super good. So if you are familiar with Jest watch mode, then this will be pretty comfortable for you. If you're not, then it has this watch usage thing where you can press P to filter by a file name regex pattern. That will allow you to just focus on a specific file, and that's how I recommend you use this in this workshop. So we'll press the P key, we'll enter the file name, so 01, 02, so on and so forth, so 01, and that will run the test just for the first exercise. Okay, so let's go to that first exercise, and right now it's running the tests against the usage example in the exercise's final. And so if you comment that out and comment in the exercise, then that will fail, and your job is to make it pass. Okay? Okay, cool. So, and if it's helpful, you can look at what the test is doing, but hopefully the error messages at least are helpful enough. So that's running the test, and then when you're all done, the test should be green. You fill out this feedback form, and then we move on to the next one. Okay? Any questions so far? Okay, so we're not just stuck in a terminal the whole time. We also have an app that actually runs. So if you run npm run start, then that will start the app. It should pop open in your browser automatically, and then you'll have the Modern React hooks and suspense. And you can you have all the exercises listed here. You can click on counter, use state. And here on the left we have your exercise code. On the right we have the finished version, so you can see, oh, this is what it's supposed to do. Okay. If you really get stuck, then you can also look at the exercises final directory and see what the finished version looks like. But don't peek if you don't want to. Like, if you want to learn, then like really struggle with it, because I promise you, I will show you how it works at the end. So you will figure it out. But don't like feel super frustrated. Sometimes just looking at the solution for a second, kind of like, oh, okay, I know what to do now. But yeah, so then you can go through all of the exercises. Woo! Isn't that cool? What? And then we've got these timers. We've got like multiple timers running at once. What? Snap. Yeah, so lots of fun things going on here. Okay. Sweet. And then we have the suspense stuff that we probably won't get to, but I guess maybe we will, where we can get like Pikachu data from a GraphQL API, and it's fun. Using suspense. It's wild. All right. I think that's pretty much it for the logistics of how to get things running locally. Does anybody have questions about that before I kind of talk holistically about hooks? Let me check the chat really quick. I will look at this chat. Let's see. Okay, I think we're all good. Sweet. So, let's talk about hooks. How many people know what hooks are already? Okay, cool. So this will be a review for you. Why are you here if you don't know what hooks are? Just kidding, just kidding. We're happy to have you here. You're like, oh, future React stuff, I want to be into that. So yeah, you're good. So this is a talk I gave pretty recently. It's actually on YouTube, so if you want like a more full version of this talk, then you can check out my YouTube channel. Oh yeah, we already did that exercise, so thank you for that. Okay, so I pretty much just want to do these two slides. Well, no, just this one. Slides, markdown files. So what makes React so hard? The three things that I think make React so hard. Okay, so I should preface this by saying React is not hard. Well, using terms like hard and easy is not very nice, because some people find it to be hard. So React itself is actually pretty simple. That's what I mean to say. So there's not a whole lot, like React's API surface area is pretty small, so you can generally learn everything there is to know about React's API itself in like a week, and then work with that, and you kind of get used to it. What makes React really hard and makes it take longer time for people to learn are three things. First, JavaScript. People have to learn Java, like really learn and understand JavaScript to be able to use React effectively. And then lifecycle methods, that can be a little challenging, and then logic reuse. So let's look at each one of these for a moment. The main reason that React hooks was created was to solve this third problem, which is really significant. So what makes JavaScript so hard? Let's take a look at this code. Can you find the bug in this code? First person to raise their hand gets a high five. Yes. Oh, okay, I was coming.
We don't pass props to super.
Oh, dude! You found the hidden bug.
It's the hidden one.
Yeah, that's the hidden one. So tell me, why is it? Yeah, see, I wasn't planning on people finding that one. See, because I got this little trick question there too. You found the other one. So
This dot increment is not bound.
yes, that's the other one. High five for you. Yes. All right, and for those of you watching online, I'll just. Okay, so yeah, Ethan, do you want to explain what the first, why the first bug is a problem? We didn't pass props. So to fix this, it's props and props. There's actually a couple arguments, so I always do this. So why is that a bug?
Because each instance of this React component needs to have, like, we need to pass the props that it's receiving as arguments in, so that each instance of this component would have the props.
Yeah, yeah. So and specifically, like the React team realizes that people will sometimes forget this, and they don't want you to not be able to have props here. So what they do is after they run your constructor, they actually monkey patch props for you onto your instance. So like your code will generally work if you forget, but the bug part is right here where you try to access props. So they add props to your instance after they run your constructor, but if in your constructor you're accessing props and you didn't call super first, then that won't happen. So like you could solve this problem by saying just calling super with nothing, then props, and then this dot props equals props, but that's kind of weird, so don't do that. Okay, so that's bug number one. You mentioned bug number two. Can you explain what the bug is?
Yeah, sure. So when we define function this way, this context depends on how function is called
Mm-hmm.
and not where the function is defined. So that's why so in here the function won't be called as a method of this component. It will be just called as just a plain function. So that's why this context in there is going to be undefined.
Yeah, exactly. So just to reiterate what you said, especially for the people who are watching who probably can't hear. But we're passing this dot increment, which is a method on our component, but it's not bound to anything in particular. So when they get this, all they're gonna see is like on click callback, and that's how they're gonna call it, right? So this in JavaScript is determined by whatever is on the left side of the dot. That's what this is. But they don't have anything on the left side of the dot in this context, and so this is just nothing. And so the error you'll see is set state is not defined or whatever. Can't call set state on undefined. So that's super annoying. To solve this problem, there are like millions of ways, and it's really annoying. If you want to do probably the best way that doesn't require special syntax that isn't standard yet, then you do this dot increment equals this dot increment dot bind this. Yuck. How many people are writing code like this? No, don't. Never mind. I don't want to ask people to volunteer things that I just said is gross. So don't do that. Install the Babel plugin that lets you do this. That's a lot nicer looking. But so those two things are not actually really React specific. It's just how JavaScript works. That's kind of annoying that we have to I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't learn how JavaScript works. Like that's one of the things I love about React is that I'm spending so much time in JavaScript that I'm learning all these things about JavaScript, and so all that is like really transferable knowledge. But wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to like for beginners, if they didn't have to just dive into all of the weird intricacies of JavaScript when they're just trying to build a little app, right? And it sure would be nice for us too. Like I've made mistakes. In fact, when Dan was introducing hooks in his talk, he ran into this bug by accident on stage. You think it was staged? Maybe it was. Maybe it was. And so, like I have run into this problem, and so what I see a lot of people do is they're just like, well, I don't like complicated rules, so I'm just gonna do this. And lots of teachers will say, just do this for everything, because it's easier to do that than to really actually learn all the rules, and like, yes, you're allocating more memory. For every instance of your component, you're going to have its own copy of that method. But at the end of the day, like, if you're rendering enough items, or enough of these components where that actually is a problem, then you're probably rendering too many components. You have other problems. So, like, if you want to just do this all the time, just change your class syntax to always be like this. Some people on the internet will yell at you, but at least you will never have this. You cannot call set state on undefined. So, yeah, kind of annoying. So anyway,
Before we go on, I have a quick question.
mhm.
You prefer this over just, I mean, this is a module, so couldn't you just push everything out of the class and use it that way?
If you did that, now what is this in this context?
Sorry, I forgot about set state.
Yeah, yep, you're good though. So yeah, it's not super great. I mean, it's not all that bad to like expect that people learn JavaScript, but if we could make it easier without making big sacrifices, then why not, right? So okay, let's talk about life cycles. So here is a single component that does a lot of stuff. It's a chat feed, and we want to make sure that we're scrolled down to the bottom so we automatically scroll as new messages come in. We'll automatically scroll for them. If they scroll up from the bottom, then we don't want to automatically scroll, right? So we're going to keep that state. We also need to get access to the user, so we're going to get their context. This is a new feature in React 16.6. something where you can get context with a static context type, which is actually pretty cool. I kind of like that. Yeah. Looks like I mean, this technically work, but so yeah, then we have component did mount, component will unmount, and component did update. Each one of these is, hey, let's get things set up, and then let's tear things down so we don't have a memory leak, whatever. And then in our component did update, I didn't even write the code because it's super annoying, because you have to say, oh, if our feed ID changed, now we need to unsubscribe and then resubscribe. The document title, that maybe we need to, we'll need to update the document title with the unread count. The subscribe to online status, so we show our online next to us. And the geolocation. This app actually exists, so and you can run it if you want to, but basically the geolocation, or the app is a geolocation based chat, public chat, so based on where you are in the world, you can chat with anybody else who's relatively close, or simulating their geolocation in their browser. So there's a message sitting in San Francisco from me. So if you go out to San Francisco and run this app, you can see my message. So yeah, component will unmount. We have to unwind all those things to make sure we don't have memory leaks. So there are a couple things that I don't like about this. First, that the code. So if we're talking about separation of concerns, I remember when React was introduced, they're like, separation of concerns. You're putting your HTML and your JavaScript together. And then we took a step back and realized, oh, that's actually separation technologies. That doesn't matter. What really matters, the concern is the component, and everything that makes that component work is its concern. So the HTML, JavaScript, CSS, all of that makes a component, right? So we love that. But and here we have the component. And one of the nice things is that we can take all the complexity, stuff it in this box of a component, and then we can use that component everywhere. And so long as you're not doing really weird things, what you've created, the abstraction itself doesn't leak out to wherever it's being used. So it's a really nice model for kind of crunching things up into something that's pretty reusable. But even within our components, we're not applying the separation of concerns properly. So we're combining 4 concerns in this method, and then we're actually separating. We're not separating concerns really. We're separating time. So at the time that this component mounts, then we want to do these things. At the time that this component unmounts, we'll do these things. And then at the time that it updates, we want to do these things. And we're grouping things based on time rather than concern. Okay, it would be really nice if there was a way to say that we want to subscribe to the feed, and right here as well, we also want to, when this thing unmounts or whatever, we also want to have it unsubscribe, and when we have it update. So everything lives all together in this one cohesive piece, and then if we want to reuse that piece, then we can go put it somewhere and make it really easy to reuse. We'll talk about reuse here in a second. The other thing is that like this just explodes our component. Like I didn't implement these methods here, but our component now is really big, and it's combining all of these different concerns that are all relevant for this component, but maybe like could be shared to other components, or like I've got sec document title here, and then I've got a restore document title at the bottom, and then in between those, and so they're just all mixed up. I think I'm kind of whacking at this when you all probably understand. You've probably felt this pain before. So that's life cycles. What we try to do to make our components a little bit more manageable and yeah, to make it easier to maintain these components is we try to extract things out so we can reuse some of this code or just separate these concerns, right? So even if we're not trying to reuse stuff, it would be nice to say, here, let's put the subscribe to feed in its own component. We'll put the document title in its own component, online status, geolocation. We'll put all these in their own components, and then we'll just compose them together using a glorious render prop API, right? So this is what we end up with that. Yuck. So I am a huge fan of render props. I've taught render props to a lot of people. I think it's great. But I never felt super comfortable with the pyramid of doom of render props. I always comforted myself in knowing that I could take any of this stuff and put it in another function component to combine them all, so I could have the pyramid of doom in one place, and then use that component. So like because React composes really well, I can just combine them all into one function component that I call like I don't know. User feed document title online status geolocation sticky scroller. That would be the name of the component. And then we just have one layer of nesting of our render prop, which is like, yeah, okay. But yeah, it would be nice if we could avoid this, right? And another thing about the render prop idea, or this way of code sharing, is the false hierarchy. In Ryan Florence's talk at ReactConf, he talked about this, where is it really important that the document title lives right there above the online status, or could it live like down here? I don't know. Even more than that, does the online status need to be here, or could it be above the subscribe to feed? Why is that hierarchy the way that it is? It doesn't need to be that way. It's very arbitrary how we decide where to put these things. Maybe it's not arbitrary. Maybe one of these components is re-rendering a lot, and so we want to put the other outside of it. We don't really know, and often we're not going to think about that. So yeah, the false hierarchy is also a bit of a problem. Now another solution for sharing code is higher order components, and there's a whole bunch of material on why render props are way superior to higher order components. I sort of agree with that sometimes, but what we're going to learn about today is superior to both by far. So great. You're going to love it. But yeah, so these are the problems, and this is the main problem that Hooks was created to solve, was logic reuse. So being able to separate concerns by their actual concern, like everything that's needed to like instantiate this thing and then tear it down and keep it updated. I want to take all of the stuff for that concern, put it in its own little thing, and then I can reuse that anywhere in any of my components. That's the big idea here. And reuse that in a way that doesn't require this really frankly not very fun pyramid of doom. I should note that like we talk about the pyramid of doom in the context of callbacks, like in Node or whatever, the callback pyramid, whatever. This is way better than that pyramid of doom. This is actually not all that like terrible. You don't wind up with error states that you have to handle or whatever. Like it's a lot easier because it's a declarative API, but it's still not nice. And it would be nice if we could make it easier to for logic reuse. And so it's all funny until you realize you have to maintain it. Then it's not funny. Okay, cool. So any questions about that? Okay, so that's the why behind hooks, and now we're going to look at the what and the how. Yeah, so I'm going to pop open another terminal instance. I'm going to npm run test, You can actually do the test number that you want to run as well, and it'll just run, well, it should have 0, 1. There we go. So yeah, just use the filter. And I've already commented the exercise final out and exercises. So I have a failing test. I have the app running right over here. So I can go to counter use state. So it's just localhost 3000 And what we're trying to build here is a counter. So in each state, it needs to know what the current count is, and it needs to be able to update that count to be the next value. So there's some state in here, and that's pretty much it. Right now, all you are rendering is to do, and that is what you need to do. You've got Cody the Koala Bear, Morty the Money Bag. Cody the Koala Bear will tell you what to do. Morty the Money Bag will give you some extra hints. So if you want to really challenge yourself, don't look at Morty's comments until you're like, okay, I need some help. Yeah, one thing I probably should have linked to was hooks, but if you go to react.js.org/hooks, then that will take you to the hooks docs. Yeah, you should have those open, and scroll over to the hooks API reference, and you can look at that reference. And yeah, any questions before I set you free? All right, I'm gonna look at the chat really quick. You are free. Fly. Did anybody have trouble setting up the repo? No? Oh. Is it working all right? Folks, really quick, some people are having trouble installing, which is totally my bad. I totally forgot to add an npm rc file to this project, so I'm going to have you do that yourself. Let me just find uh, yeah, here we go. I need that. Okay, so right at the root of the project, add a .npmrc and set registry to HTTP, I think HTTPS actually, registry npmjs.org. If you do that, then you should be able to install. That's a rookie mistake right there. I should have had that file in there. Raise your hand if you're already finished. Okay, I'll actually keep on working at it. Yeah, stop on the first one. We're all just going like, yeah, let's do this. Yeah. You can finish early if you want, and you can jump out. All right, raise your hand if you're all done with the first one. Okay, cool. If you're not done, that's fine. Okay, cool. So let's do this thing. So Cody the Koala Bear said we need to add or use state to our import. So let's do that. Let's import use state. We want to use state in our component. Okay, but our component, all of our components in our entire code base can be a function component. There are some things that hooks don't support, but there are NPM modules for like the biggest use case is component did catch. That's not supported by hooks. They're planning on supporting it, it eventually, before it's released probably. But right now that's not supported. But for that, I actually just use a React Error Boundary NPM module, and I don't have to use classes ever. It's so great. So cool. Let's go ahead. We need to get our state to get our count and our set state, or sorry, our count and our set count. So here I'm going to just do count equals 0 just to hard code that really quick. Cool. Did I get my test working? Oh no, test writer was a thinker. They want to make sure we can update that value. So let's go ahead and we'll say use state. We'll initialize it to 0. Okay. Oh, and that should have been count anyway. Sweet. Okay. But what we get back from use state is actually an array, and it is an array by design so that you can destructure it. So you should generally always use state like this, where you destructure that array value, where the first value is the count, and the second value, or sorry, the first value is that state, whatever the state is, and the second value is the a mechanism for updating the state. So we're going to call this set count. The reason it's an array instead of an object is so that you can actually name these whatever you want. So if this was an object, then we'd have state and set state, right? That's what they'd probably call it. But if you wanted it to be called count instead, like you're using a couple of these in one component, which you totally can do, then you'd have to alias this to count and set count. And I like one of those better than the other. So it's an array. You're destructuring that array. You get the state value and a mechanism for updating that state value. That state value is initialized to whatever you pass as the argument to use state. So I can do anything. I could do an object. I could do an array. I could do hello world. It doesn't matter. It can be a primitive or it can be an object. We're doing numbers here, so we'll just initialize it to 0. And then we can use that state. And then we need an onClick handler. onClick. And what do we put inside of our onClick handler? Well, normally it'd be like this dot increment count, but we don't have this. Okay. So what we do have is this set count function. So I'm going to do that. Set count plus 1. Da-na-na-na. And it works. Beep, 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 beep. Raise your hand if you did it. Yes. If you didn't, that's fine. High five anyway. Thanks for trying. Okay, cool. One thing I'm going to do just to make this a little bit nicer is I'm going to actually call this increment. Cost increment. There we go. That looks nice. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Do you want to see what this looks like? What this would look like in like a React component, or a class component? I actually make counter components so much that I have a snippet. Boom. That's what it looks like. Which one of those do you like better? You like the bottom one better? Even though hooks are unfamiliar and in alpha? Yeah, me too. We don't have to worry about this. We don't have to have this class declaration. One other thing we don't have to do, let's take a look at the Babel REPL online. babeljs.io/REPL. I'm going to put my class in there. Oh, we need to include some non-standard feature. Let's see, what stage is that? I don't know. Missing class properties transform. Let's add class properties. There we go. All right. So my 7 lines of React code got exploded into 45 lines of compiled code. Let's see what it looks like when I use the function form. Now, yeah, slice to array. That exists for the destructuring that we're doing here. So it's not entirely fair. It's not like every single time you use a class in your code base you're going to have all of this stuff, because you should be using the Babel runtime module, and so all of these will just be referencing Babel runtime. My guess is that many of our apps are not using that, and so every single one of your files that uses a class has this code. If you're not doing that using Babel runtime, you should look into it right now, because this is non-trivial. So aside from that, the code required to for classes is really hard for the browsers to optimize for compiled classes. Now, if you're doing like legit classes, you don't need to compile them. You're shipping legit classes. That's a little bit different. But functions are still easier to optimize for browsers than classes are. So you're better on your bundle size if you're not using any classes. You're better on your performance if you're not using classes. You're just in a better situation altogether. It looks nicer, it's easier to understand, it has way fewer pitfalls. There are pitfalls, which we'll talk about, but it has fewer of them. So I'm pretty happy with this change. What questions do you have? While you're thinking of your questions, I will see if the live stream has questions really quick. Cool. Okay, so Rook is asking if, so in, actually, right here, this is what I'm doing in our class version of the counter. So when I call setState, I'm actually using the updater function style of setState, which like you have to do for certain reasons relating to batching of setState calls and things. And most people who use React don't actually know that even is a thing, because it's kind of obscure. So in what we're doing here is we're basically saying, hey, setState, get me the current state, and I'm going to take that current state, I'm going to change it, I'm going to make a change to state based off of the previous state. That's what I want to do. With our counter here, most of the time you don't actually have to do that, because the way that closures work. So we have access to what the current state is. We can provide a state updater, so we can say count or prev count, and then we return the value that we want for the new state. This would work just as well. You can do that, but it's not necessary most of the time, because the way that closures work and batching, 99% of the time, the value that you have from count is going to be the same as what you have from the updater method. The times where this is different is if you're in a like you've made an asynchronous request, or you're in a set callback or something like that, and or sorry, a set timeout, and you're updating, or you're calling the updater function at a next tick of the event loop or something, another tick of the event loop. Now between the time that you created that callback to do that update and when the update actually happens, that state could have actually changed. And so in that scenario, you might want to use the state updater function, but most of the time you don't need to use state updater functions, which is pretty cool. All right, let's get rid of this class. Okay, sweet. So I'm going to go ahead and let you do your elaboration and feedback. Tell me what you learned, and in a minute we'll move on to the next one. Okay. Cool. You ready to try the next one? This is super fun. Alright, I love the enthusiasm. Okay, number 2. So if we look at our React app, go to number 2, counter custom hooks. So our exercise works and our final version works. So what we're doing is a refactor. So they both work. You can't see a visual difference. So this is code refactor time. This is one of the coolest features of React, or of hooks, and actually the reason that it was created, the main reason it was created. So this looks just like regular JavaScript, so I wonder if we could like reuse this in another component or something. That's what you're going to be doing. I'm not going to say too much because this one is going to be pretty short. It's easier than you think. When you're done, you're like, wait, is that it? So give it a try for a minute or two, and then we'll come back and I'll do the solution. Sorry, it was noted that in the test, if you comment out, let me turn that down. If you comment out this and comment this in, then you're gonna have a problem with the use counter here. That's actually a bad test, and I'll fix that later. But yeah, just use counter. Actually, I guess that yeah, it's necessary. I'm testing implementation details on purpose because I'm making sure that your implementation is correct. So. Yeah, so you'll need to do that. And I'll run the test. Alright, let's go ahead and do this. How many of you finished? Bravo! Alright, let's get this working. So, like I said, this is actually going to be quite a bit simpler than you might think at first. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a function, and I'm going to call it whatever, and then I'm just going to move this. We'll return count and increment count. Then count increment count equals whatever. This is like, how many people have refactored JavaScript before? No, just kidding. Everybody should. We do this all the time, right? We're like, oh, here are a couple lines of code. I'm gonna copy paste it over here. Then I'll copy paste. Oh, I'm copy and pasting this a lot. Let's just make a function, and now we just use that, right? And it doesn't, like, the function name doesn't matter. In our case, we're going to follow a convention that the React team is recommending that we follow, where we name this function use, something that starts with use, and for us we'll say use counter. Okay, so the reason that the React team wants this convention is because this is a custom hook. This is what it's called. We make our custom hook. We can do anything that we want to inside of here. Normally we'll be using hooks inside of there, using React hooks. And we can use multiple hooks. We can use as many as we want in here. And then we can return whatever we want. We can accept whatever we want. So I could say initial state. We'll default that to 0. Initial state here. Okay, so we can do anything that we want to in here. And the reason that we follow this convention where we start our hook with our custom hook with use is so that when React releases a linter that will make sure that we're using hooks properly, it can check our custom hooks as well, make sure that we're using custom hooks properly too. And I'll talk about the rules of hooks toward the end. Yeah, Ethan.
Can you give us some insight on how the set count function is causing everything to re-render?
Yeah, sure. So the question is, how is this set count causing things to re-render? I feel like there's a good blog post about like how hooks works fundamentally, but basically what it is inside of React they've got hooks, and when you say use state, they're going to push an item onto this hooks array that has information about that hook, so like what the state is, and so then when you call this the hook updater function, it knows which hook or which one of the set state hooks that is, or use state hooks that is, and it knows what React component that belongs to, and it behaves pretty much the same as a regular set state call. It'll say, oh, okay, let's go update the value for that state hook with whatever they're calling us with, and then we'll take the React component that's associated with and render it over again. And so then when we call use state again, it has our hook in the in that array. It's going to pull out that value and a new function to update the state, and we'll get that count and that set count there, and then it's re-rendering every time. So we get a new value, new set count every time. Does that answer your question?
It does. I don't know how they're figuring out which component it belongs to. But I can get it.
Yeah, so they do a lot of tracking as they're rendering. They'll keep track of, like, here's this component in our, or this, I think they call it a fiber. Lots of this stuff is beyond me, but yeah, so they can keep track of the hooks that are associated with specific component instances, which is kind of weird because function components actually don't have an instance, but they have some mechanism for keeping track of specific components, which has always been the case, and they just attach the hooks to that. So
why return an object?
Yeah. Why return an object instead of an array? So we could do it that way, and the nice thing about that is now we can use counter twice, and we can call it whatever we want. So we can say count 1, and this can be count 2, right? Increment count 1 and count 2. So we don't have to alias things, whatever. I did that mostly to illustrate that you can return anything you want. So yeah. If I'm doing more than just two things, like the value and a way to update that value, like I think we've got an example later on where we do that. Like you take a render prop API that returns or that renders with a bunch of state, and you convert that to a hook, which is pretty cool. Then in that situation, I'll return an object, because otherwise it's like, what order are these in? In. So yeah, so I would return an object for something that was that big. But I'm glad that you asked that. You can return whatever you want. And you can return functions. You can return components. You can return anything. It's pretty cool. If you are creating components in your custom hook, then you're going to want to use memo probably, so that you don't create a brand new component. That will cause that component to unmount and remount every single render. So you don't want to create components in your render method, but they have a mechanism for memoizing components, which is pretty cool, or memoizing values. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. We're not going to cover that today, but experiment with it. Any other questions? All right, sweet. Yeah, pretty sweet code sharing or code reuse mechanisms here. Okay, so I'm going to set you off on the elaboration and feedback. It looks like I accidentally set that to be exercise 1, so please update that to 2. My bad, I'll fix that. Yeah, then we'll talk about the next exercise. Actually, maybe we should take a break. Do you all want to take a break? Yeah? Okay, we're going to take like a, I don't know, we'll go into 11:20, so 8-minute break. And then when we get back, we'll get into the third exercise. get back to this. So I think we're gonna take lunch at noon. Is that good? Okay. Cool. So let's talk about exercise 3 then. So we're gonna use a new hook. So if you look at the React Hooks API reference, the next one we're using is this use effect one. I will leave you to explore those docs when we're going through this. But let's look at the use case that we're trying to build here. So you'll notice my final version started at 20, and if I refresh, it's still at 20. Yours is probably at 0. But start clicking on it and then refresh, and it will persist. What? How do we do that? Oh! Yeah, local storage. So that is what we want to do, is anytime we update that count value, we want to update local storage. Now, you could pretty easily do this just by saying, oh, okay, let's, and local storage, set it right there, right, in our callback handler. But when I mentioned that to the React team, they're like, yeah, don't do that, use effects instead. I'm not entirely sure why, but this is actually a pretty good way to teach you use effects, so I'm going with this. So, yeah, there are two things that you need to be cognizant of here. Not only when we update the count do we need to update local storage, but we also have to read from local storage when our component is rendering initially, right? So we get the right initial state. Okay. So there are basically two things that you need to do here. Three things. You need to import use effects and then update those two things. Feel free to look at the hook stocks for a little bit of explanation of how to use the use effect hook, and I'll give you a couple minutes to work on this one. Oh yeah, and you'll want to get your test going, so npm run test and then 03. And swap. Oh, and I took our custom hook and I removed it, moved everything back into the function body just because I thought that was a little easier. So. Can you remind me when I'm going through the solution to show you what we have to do with testing? It is a little bit different. I don't want to forget. raise your hand if you finished. But yeah, okay, probably not. So, all right. Like I said, if you don't finish, that's actually fine, because it's mostly to get you in the frame of mind so you can ask the right questions. So the first thing, some of these code of the koala bears don't really make sense in order top to bottom, and so you'll see numbers next to some of these. So we'll go in order. I'm going to just copy Morty the Moneybags code here. So we need to get the value out of local storage. So we're like initial count equals that. Okay. So that's our initial count. It's going to come straight out of local storage. If we don't have a value in local storage, maybe this is the first time in our app or whatever, then we'll say just or 0. Okay. In local storage, it's stored as a string, so we're going to just pass everything to the number constructor and make it a number. Cool. Okay. So then we want to pull in useEffect so that we can not only initialize it properly, but we can update it as things are updated. So I'm going to add useEffect here, and this is going to take a callback. And inside of here, I'll update our count. So I'm going to just say instead of get item, we'll set item, and the value is going to be the count. And that's it. So yeah, and now I click this one up, and then I'll refresh, and my final version now should resemble that same amount. Alright, raise your hand if you have more than 41 clicks on this thing. I'm winning! Ah, man, alright, well. Okay, cool. So what questions do you have about this? One question you might ask is, why don't we just do this? Oh, you can do that, and it'll actually work. It will function. We might get a warning. I don't know, probably not. Yep. So, yeah, can anybody suggest reasons why you might not want to do just this?
Because again, we might need to wait for React to actually update the DOM.
Yeah, potentially. Like React, what we're doing here is we're creating React elements, and that doesn't mean that those are ever going to be even rendered. Like whoever's rendering the counter might just be like saying, okay, get me well, yeah, when React is actually rendering things, it is going to call our function, and so that means it's probably going to be rendered. But we may need to wait until it actually is rendered before we update that value. We could wind up with the state incongruency, or I guess inconsistency. So yeah, that's one reason. This also is blocking. That API call is a blocking API call. So that's going to slow down our render quite a bit. This is also a blocking API call. We're going to look at what we can do to improve that next. But yeah, so that's for performance reasons. That's a reason to avoid that. Another thing is this, and honestly, I can't really explain it. The word is idempotent. Does anybody know what that means?
That it doesn't matter how many times you call a function, the end result will be the same.
Yes. So that doesn't mean necessarily that it's pure. It could be doing other like our function is not pure. So we're calling useState. That is not a pure operation. But as React makes it so that it's idempotent, meaning that yeah, every single time you call it, it's going to give us the same result. So because of the way that React's hooks work, it allows us to treat our functions as idempotent. Now, if it's doing side effects like this, it is affecting the world in a way that it makes it not idempotent. So it's not, and part of the reason that's important is for concurrent mode in React. So upcoming next year sometime when concurrent mode is like officially supported by React, that will make concurrent mode not work quite as nicely. So yeah, so that is why we have this escape hatch called useEffect, so we can say, hey React, whenever you're done rendering everything, I want this code to be run. And that actually is what's happening here. So this useEffect callback will literally be run sometime after the render, when the render is finished. That is similar but not the same as component.did.mount and component.did.update. Those run synchronously after the render. So before the before the user could possibly see anything, before the DOM actually updates, we're going to be calling those functions. But here with useEffect, it waits until after render is already completed before it schedules this callback to be run. That's a great thing because I want I really want the user to see stuff like before I go and do my side effects things. Like I don't care if local storage is updated milliseconds later. I'd rather have the UI be updated. Right now, there is a way to force something to run synchronously after render. That's use layout effect, and we'll be using that later. But 99% of the time, we actually don't want to block rendering with these side effects. Somebody raised a hand, and I just kept talking. Does somebody have a question? Okay, cool. So as kind of a byproduct of this fact that our callback won't be called until after the render has happened, this actually changes our tests a little bit because now our tests can't be synchronous. Like I can't go in here and say and render this counter and then click on the count or the increment button and then verify that local storage has been updated synchronously. I have to wait until my callback has been called. And so I can do like async await or something, but actually there's something wrong, and I haven't investigated enough, but there's something wrong in JSDOM that makes it so if you wait, React won't actually call your callback function for some reason. I don't know why. It doesn't. That's not a problem in the browser when I run my tests in the browser, but if I run it in JSDOM, it doesn't work, so I'm not sure what's going on. So there is actually a way that you can force React to run your side effect your effect callbacks synchronously, and that's by rendering something else anywhere else on the page. When you kick off a new render, then it's going to run your side effects. And so that's what this flush effects utility, experimental, like asterisk, from React Testing Library does. So if you're using React Testing Library, you want to play around with hooks, and you're doing tests for your effects, then you can call this flush effects thing. And it's kind of interesting. All that this thing does is flush effect. Oh, that's my TypeScript definitions. We go here. All this does is it says, hey, React DOM, I want you to render null in this random element that I created. And that'll force your effects to run synchronously. It's a bit of a hack. I'm talking with the React team to see if we can make that better, but right now it works pretty well. And I actually kind of like it. There's another way you can force your effects to run synchronously, and that's to reassign React.useEffect to React.useLayoutEffect before you run your tests, and then they'll all just run synchronously. But Dan, he didn't get mad at me, but he was like, don't do that. Because then you can't verify what the rendered output looks like before your effect runs. So I'm warming up to this useEffect thing, or this flush effects thing. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that up because most of the time, especially if you're using React Testing Library, you actually, as you're refactoring to hooks, you shouldn't have to change your tests. If you do have to change your tests, then what you're doing is not a refactor. It's like you're breaking something, right? If you're or your tests are testing implementation details, and you should throw them away anyway. So use React Testing Library. You won't have that problem. Okay, any questions about this? All right. So there are two problems with this. We'll get into on number 4 after you do your elaboration stuff. But one is every single time our component is rendered, we're reading local storage. That's a problem, right? That's a blocking operation. And so if we're rendering a bunch of counters, that could be a performance problem. So we're going to look into how we can solve that. The other problem is every single time our component is rendered, useEffect is going to run. Our useEffect callback is going to run. Okay, that's okay for our use case because there's only one thing that can really update the DOM right now, and that's setting the counter state. But in a normal app where you have lots of pieces of state, the parent could re-render, causing all of the children to re-render. And so now we're calling, hey, set item on this count, when the count hasn't actually updated anyway. So we're going to look into solving that problem too. But before we get into that, hop into the test 403 and open up that elaboration form and fill that out. I'm going to check out questions on the live stream.
It's still quick, it still says
Oh, 03, thank you. Let me fix that. Yeah. Alright, sweet. Let us move on to solving these problems. Okay, actually, who's heard of the TV show Peg plus Cat? So I went on a cruise with my family recently, and when you have little children, sometimes having a TV in the cruise room or in our cabin was really nice. And they played this show Peg plus Cat, which I never heard of before. But she, like, during the course of the show, she'll like look at the camera and say, "We have a big problem." That just made me think of that. Okay, so we do have a big problem, and that problem is that we are every single time we render this counter component, we're reading local storage. We only need to do that the first time because we're just getting the initial state. Okay, so that's the first problem we're going to solve. The second problem is that every time this counter renders, whether it's rendering because the count updated or the parent is updating, this useEffect is going to be called. We only really want this useEffect callback to be called when the count changes. Okay, if the count didn't change, then why call it, right? So in classic or in class components, you'll do this in component did update, and you'll say if previous props.count or previous state.count is equal to the current state, then we don't do anything, right? So React has that those semantics built in to useEffect as a second argument. So I'll set you free on this, and as it occurs to me, I don't have any way for you to test whether this works in the browser. If you want to, you could edit the usage here and add like an extra counter or something, which will cause the usage to re-render, and then you'll see if your effect is being called you can add a console log or something. So if you finish early, you can like play around with it and make sure that things are only called when they should be. But yeah, go for it and have a great time. Yeah, this is the last one before lunch. So, yeah, we'll come back at 1. Cool. Let's do this number 4. Okay. So the first one is actually really easy. Yeah, that's it. Just turn this into a function that returns the value that you want. And now that code is there, and we're allocating memory for the function every time, which, yeah, maybe that's not good. We could actually, because this isn't using any values here, we could actually extract that and just go get initial count. Put that up here. And now we're not even allocating memory for that function every time. So we could do that if we want to. Yeah, that's all that one takes. Yes, question?
I've heard some people asking, can you explain why that will only be called the first time? By putting it in a function, why does that help?
Yeah, so the reason that it helps is because React will only call the function that you give it the first, or when the component is rendered, just the first time. In subsequent times, it doesn't need to get the initial state because it has the current state. So it only calls that function to get the initial state when we're initializing the component. So that's why it helps. Does that answer the question?
So are you saying that like React is interrogating the argument in each state and sees it's a function and therefore
I'm not sure I understood your question. Sorry, Max.
I guess I'm confused as to why when you provide it a function that returns something that it would only call it. Like what's it doing to determine, hey, I only call this the first time, whereas if you just grab something from local state, which isn't in itself calling a function, it calls it
So yeah, so we are calling here. Let's pull this back down. So we can either have get initial count or the initial count. So if we look at these two differences, or these two, and we'll. Okay, if we look at those two lines of code, this one is creating a function that will run some code. And so just by the nature of JavaScript, that code doesn't actually run until this function is actually called. Whereas this code will run every time to initialize that value. Okay, so that's the big difference, is that we're creating a function that will run some code, and we don't want that code to run until that function is called. And React will say, am I initializing this component? If I am, then I will call the state initializer. Otherwise, I won't. If your initial state happens to be a function, which is kind of weird, then you'll need to make a function that returns a function. There's no way to do that. But I can't imagine a situation where you'd need state to be a function. So, cool. Okay. So we can move this out. I wouldn't really think about it either way. So I don't really care whether you move it out or not. If you're rendering enough components where that becomes a performance problem, that's not your performance problem. You're rendering too many components. The browsers are pretty fast, even mobile. Okay, cool. Any other questions about initializing state via a function? Yeah.
I'm finding in the API reference where it talks about that. I found in the FAQ it says something about like one level mention in period is expensive if you pass a function.
Yeah. So my guess is that the reason they don't mention it is because it's an optimization that probably doesn't matter most of the time. That's my guess. Yeah. Lazy. Yeah, there it is. Lazy initialization. It is in there toward the end of the use state, actually. So, yeah. Cool. Any other questions before we do our next optimization? Okay. Sweet. So the next one is right here. It's pretty straightforward. We, as the second argument to use effect, you can provide an array of dependencies. And if you provide no array of dependencies, then React will just say, oh, you depend on everything in the world, so I'm going to just call you all the time. If you provide an array with no items, then you say, oh, you don't depend on anything, so I'll only call you when, when you provide an array at all, you're saying, I have dependencies. This thing has dependencies. Then React will check in that array between renders and say, did anything in this array change? If anything in this array changed, then I will call the effect. So when you provide an empty array, does anything change in that empty array? No, it never changes. And so your effect is only called once, and it's called on mount. Okay? But we do want it to be called, we want it to be called when the count changes, so we'll provide the count. Okay? So, a couple of gotchas. Actually, sorry, before I talk about gotchas, any questions about this? Yeah.
You supply multiple values to the array.
Yep.
To change like all of them or just one?
Yeah, just one. Yep. So if you had like foo or whatever, if count or foo change, then it will be called. Yeah. So you probably don't want to programmatically generate this array because you need to make sure that things are in the same order between renders.
And just to be clear, it interrogates count, and then if it hasn't changed, it prevents the callback method from being called.
That's right.
Whereas with component did update, it prevents the vendor from being called. Or anything within the if block.
Right, yeah. So like, just to be clear, if this counter, in our little app, in our example right now, the only way we can re-render counter is by updating the count. So like our effect is going to be called every time. But in a real app, there are multiple reasons that your component could re-render. It has internal state update, or its parent has state that's updating, or it's using context that's updating things. So there are various ways for our component to re-render. And so as an optimization, React allows us to say, only rerun this if these things change. Now, it's not even doing a shallow comparison, it's doing reference equality, right? So if you provide an object here, maybe an object of count, this will cause it to rerun every single time because that's a new object in memory, old object in memory, they do not equal each other. Normally this shouldn't be an issue, but it sometimes is. And I have actually, I have a course coming out on Egghead in a couple weeks, and I show you how to solve this problem. I create a use deep compare effect custom hook that makes that work. It's kind of weird, but yeah, normally you don't need to do that. So just be aware, don't pass an object that's being recreated or that is not the same between renders, and you should be okay. Okay, sweet. Any other questions before we break for lunch?
Yeah, one
Yeah.
question. So I've read a couple of blog posts and spoke with some people at React Conf about this second argument of this kind of things. And what you mentioned was that if you put an empty array, it'll only run on mount. So it sounds like it kind of has the effect of being on mount. So what can you say about? I mean, it sounds like if we're sure we want it to have the effect of being just like component now, we should just always include that second array.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, so what's interesting is the decision to make useEffect run the callback every single update is an interesting one. But so long as, and we're going to talk about the cleanup function next, I think, or maybe in 2 exercises, but so long as you're cleaning up properly, having that call every update could be a problem, but it probably is okay. It won't cause any like severe bugs in your application, and so that's I think the main reason why they made that decision. So as far as providing an empty array to make sure that it only runs on mount, yeah, we're concerned a little, or I think they're trying to get us away from this thinking about mounting and updating and unmounting, and just thinking about this is an effect that I want to have happen when this runs, and then we can optimize if there's a problem. So most of the time, like in our case, this would have worked fine. Like it's not a big deal to update local storage to what the current count is, even if it's the same as it was before. Not a huge deal. If we're making network requests, then yeah, maybe that is a problem. But yeah, for many of our effects, we're like adding event listeners, and in our cleanup, we'd be removing them. So we're adding and removing every single time it renders. That's probably not optimal, but it's also probably not, like it's not going to break your app, most likely. So that's where I think the default came into is the problems are less of a problem, I guess. So that was a lot of words. I don't know if that really...
One last follow-up. So, I mean, what you mentioned about making network calls, I mean, that's obviously pretty common use case. So I imagine if I have something in a class-based component now that I've got and then we're calling component now. And then I've got a bunch of other stuff that I classify as effects. I should just have many use effects.
Yes.
Try and group things together in a really color.
Yes, that's a great observation, Max. So what he said was, if I had lots of different things, like in our chat example that I showed before, where we're subscribing to a feed and then we're updating the online status and the geolocation, each one of those should be its own use effect call. You would not put those in the same callback. You'd put them in by themselves, because one of the biggest benefits of these hooks is the ability to separate those out. A hook is cheap, use them and keep them separate. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Any other questions before we break for lunch? Okay, so considering time, I'm only going to give you an hour for lunch. I will start promptly at 1. So I'll be back here in an hour. And for the live stream folks, let me get you a link to the live stream. I think that's a live stream. Hopefully it is. Yeah, this afternoon live stream that I'm going to start later. So, okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, we'll see you this afternoon.
Yeah.
Yeah, the rest of my team is like, my partners, except for Matt, although that's
Huh?
He's like, he's looking at, no, it's like a coupon, basically, but without a coupon code.
I mean, whenever it's stable,
Basically, when you like how they just like shut it down.
I think in 2 years, everybody's.
He's working on
I think
that,
that's
so
just
it's almost all back end.
But I don't know.